Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India Votes 2019 with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, it's that time again when political parties in the lead up to the elections come out with their manifestos. Lofty promises are made during campaigning but are seldom realized once they come to power. On this edition of India Votes 2019, we will analyze how pre-poll promises impact the economy. Do the doles reach the intended beneficiaries? And can promises made by political parties be legally enforceable after a party comes to power? That and much more on this edition of India Votes 2019. Well, Congress President Rahul Gandhi made a big bang poll promise on Monday, announcing a guaranteed minimum income of 72,000 rupees per year for the poor families. If his party is voted to power, he said the scheme will benefit around 25 crore people. This scheme, Rahul Gandhi asserts, will be the final assault on poverty.
कांग्रेस पार्टी ने निर्णय लिया है कि हम हिंदुस्तान के गरीब लोगों को न्याय देने जा रहे हैं। न्याय जो हमारा मिनिमम इनकम गारंटी का स्कीम है, न्यूनतम आय योजना, कांग्रेस पार्टी गारंटी करती है अगर आपकी आमदनी 12,000 रुपए से कम है तो हम आपकी आमदनी को 12,000 तक पहुंचा देंगे। कोई काम बंद नहीं करेगा। जब वो व्यक्ति कंफर्टेबली निकल जाएगा 12,000 से, फिर वो स्कीम उसको सो इट विल स्टॉप ऑन इट्स ओन। बट हमारी फिलॉसफी है कि अगर आप हिंदुस्तान में आज एक मिनिमम इनकम से कम आपकी आमदनी है तो फिर आप गरीबी से निकल ही नहीं सकते हो। 5 करोड़ फैमिलीज, 25 करोड़ लोगों को डायरेक्ट इस स्कीम का फायदा मिलेगा। आई हैव चेक्ड इट अगेन एंड अगेन एंड अगेन। इट इज फिजिकली परफेक्टली पॉसिबल। हमने आपको मनरेगा कमिट करके दिया था, हमने करके दिखा दिया। अब हम आपको न्याय कमिट कर रहे हैं, हम गरीबी को हिंदुस्तान से मिटा देंगे।
Rahul Gandhi has called it a groundbreaking idea that will wipe out poverty from the country. For unskilled labor, 72,000 rupees per year is equivalent to 172 to 338 days of employment at minimum wage, depending on the state they are in. For the highly skilled, this amount is equivalent to 132 to 254 days of employment at minimum wage. It differs from Manrega in that it is a bigger guarantee of income and it is also not conditional on getting work. But how financially viable is it? The Congress party has said that it has finalized the scheme after thorough consultations with economists and experts. Let's take a look at what this scheme will cost to the economy. Congress's proposed scheme will cost the exchequer 3.6 lakh crore rupees every year. In comparison, the centre's planned expenditure on education is 94,000 crore rupees. The combined food, fertilizer and petroleum subsidies for the year 2019-20 is 3 lakh crore rupees. Budget for the PM Kisan cash transfer scheme is 75,000 crore rupees and the centre's health budget is 61,000 crore rupees.
Claim by Shri Rahul Gandhi calling it Nyunatam Ay Yojana and therefore saying Nyay, N-O-Y-N-A-Y-A-Y. It's not really Nyay. Where is he going to get that money from? And if such a scheme is already giving so many true direct benefit to the people, we think it is just sort of giving a election time promise, which if I have to recall, one such a promise which was given in Madhya Pradesh has not even seen full coverage yet, not even the money yet, and therefore promises are normally given by Congress party. They have been eradicating poverty since 1971 with Garibi Hatao program. If Garibi is still there after the Hatao program of Srimati Indira Gandhi, Rahul Gandhi first of all will have to answer that.
And joining me for a discussion on this particular issue on the program today, I have with me Aarti Jerat, senior journalist, Abhinav Prakash, assistant professor of economics, University of Delhi, and A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India Votes 2019. Mr. Bhattacharya, I'd like to begin the program with you first. What do you make of Rahul Gandhi's minimum income guarantee scheme?
2-3 points. It is not that it is not possible to implement this scheme. I think it is possible to implement the scheme, but it has serious economic and fiscal consequences for any government that undertakes it. Number two, I think it is a reflection of the current Indian politics, strange love affair with handout politics. I think this tendency of handout politics was started in this year's budget with the PM Kisan Yojana, where people, farmers with cultivable land of less than 2 hectares would be given 6,000 rupees per year without anything. Just if you have that piece of land, you get that money. So it is a kind of a handout politics in my view. It is not like Narega. So it actually takes the level of political debate and discourse to an area where handing out money is seen as solving people's problem. And number three, and that's my final point, is that it will take us to a situation where politically it will be unfeasible for any government to phase out or eliminate any existing subsidies. The kind of subsidies or the kind of schemes that you talked about cannot be phased out by any government if it wants to stay politically in power. So I think, so therefore this will be an additionality. Now this additionality of 3.6 lakh crore is almost around 1.9% of GDP. So as somebody pointed out, that clearly your fiscal deficit will balloon to a level where it's unsustainable. And my final point, with fourth point, is that if you want to implement this scheme of income support scheme, in itself is not a bad idea, but probably the timing of it is wrong, because this might lull the state into this belief, a mistaken belief, that the state, by doling out this money, is doing its responsibility and washing itself off its larger responsibility of creating capacity in social infrastructure, economic infrastructure, providing food, providing housing, providing hygiene, providing health, providing education. The state might say, listen, I have given my 12,000 rupees to you, and please help yourself. We'll go to the dispensary and pay the market cost and do whatever you want to do. Now the question is that, do you want a state where the state, the exchequer, the government withdraws and disclaims the responsibility towards its citizens of creating those basic capacities? The income support schemes globally has come in countries wherein the stage of economic development was far, far more advanced than it is obtains in India right now. With the per capita income of what it obtains in India right now, I don't think we have reached a point where we need to income support schemes without creating those basic transfer schemes. And this is not a universal basic income, because this is going to a segment of people. So the scheme may well be porous and may well be poorly targeted. People who are getting little more than 12,000, 15,000 can come back into it. So therefore, I am not greatly enthused by this scheme, for the simple reason that it has the associated curse of handout politics.
Right. That having been said, taking the discussion forward, Aarti Jairat, so Ms. Bhattacharya was talking about several schemes and how it's really difficult to put an end to some of the other schemes that are already in existence. So is it time now maybe that we get rid of all of those schemes and have one universal basic income kind of a scheme? Maybe not a minimum income guarantee, but a universal basic income.
I quite agree with him that how are you going to get rid of schemes that are already existing? I mean, if you remember the present government, when Prime Minister Modi spoke in the Lok Sabha, I think one of his first few speeches, he talked about Manrega being, that he would keep Manrega on as a symbol of the monumental disaster of the Congress party. But actually, subsequently, every year, we've seen the government adding more money into that scheme. because there has been actual rural distress and people, you know, in rural areas have needed that money. So I really don't see how, you know, these schemes will be gotten rid of. But I'd like to take off from another point that he raised, you know, about this, you know, in lack of investment or the government washing its hands off from, you know, taking care of basic needs that really, you know, or investing in infrastructure that people need.
The prime responsibility.
That's right, which is education, healthcare, you know, roads, you know, sort of job creation, skill development, and so on. You know, I mean, listen, it sounds very nice to give people a basic income support, and I'm sure people who are really poor, particularly he's talking about the poorest of the poor, they do need some kind of income support. But I think in the long run, what people really need is assistance from the government to empower themselves so that they can move up and move out of poverty. I don't think getting money every month is going to necessarily help them move out of poverty if they cannot access some kind of good quality education, healthcare, which can, you know, take them a step forward. You can just sit at home, get that money, but then what do you do with that after that? You know, you need to be able to send your children to school. You need to make sure that they don't fall ill, they're not malnourished. You need to, you know, you need to find, you know, some sort of skills for them to get as they grow older, jobs for them to get as they grow older. So how is this income guarantee going to get them all that? And that is really the fear we've seen over the last many years, actually, not just the last 5 years, but many years. We have seen the government withdrawing from education, from health, handing it over to the private sector, which just is so expensive and really it's unaffordable for the poor. So I think the primary responsibility of the state should be to create infrastructure that empowers people to move out of poverty rather than giving them doles.
Right. So, Abhinav, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So what has the experience really been with, you know, minimum income schemes across the world and in India as well? I think there were a couple of pilot projects, you know, earlier in this decade in Madhya Pradesh, in a couple of villages where they tried to do something like this. The SDF in Sikkim earlier this year said that, you know, they're going to go ahead with a scheme like this. What has the experience been?
See, when we're talking about the income transfer schemes, we have two things at play. One, it is being targeted at the poverty reduction, which I think is trivializing the entire concept of poverty reduction. What we don't realize that India has been reducing poverty at a very fast rate. Between 2005 and 6 and 15 and 16, we have reduced the poverty by 27 crore people. And in the last 3 years, is something we are missing. According to the World Data Lab, we have pulled 7.5 crore people out of the poverty. And what has worked in that is basically access to nutrition, sanitation, utilities like electricity, and most importantly, asset creation. So when we're talking about the income support scheme like this thing, and say this is a one-stop solution for the poverty reduction, I think that is trivializing the entire concept of poverty reduction, entire effort to that. There's other part to it. Yes, we need to give some kind of income support because we have discussed this point over the time, over the different shows, that because of the fluctuations in the jobs market and the changing economic structure, where the future of work itself is at stake, we need to ensure that there is some minimum amount of income which is available to the people. Yes, there have been a couple of pilot projects.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to add so that we can, you know, so what happens to the workforce then? Do they then, you know, get a little lazy because they know they have some kind of a minimum income, or what is it really?
No, this is a very strong stereotype that, you know, you are giving a dole-out politics, you are giving a handout politics. I think that has a very deep class and social bias against the poor people, where the experience and the evidence shows when the poor people do get money, they don't basically use it for drugs or alcohol. They don't. They basically use it for productive purposes, especially when the money is going to the women in the household. So all the evidence shows that, well, this is not true, that they are going to waste that money. This income transfer schemes across the world have actually worked.
So that's a good thing.
It's a good thing overall, but the point is that how you implement that. What is being promised out here has come with no plan or no details. So we just don't know what the Congress party is promising. And of course, there's a concern about the fiscal deficit as well. So can you implement such a large amount of transfer without putting the necessary infrastructure in place? And this is, I will say, a bit ironic that when PM Kisan Yojana was launched, it was denounced as the cash for vote thing, and the same thing is being promised again. Now, you can't implement these policies without having a robust technological infrastructure at place. You can't go on opposing Aadhaar and say we will do income transfer. You can't go on opposing the digitalization of the records and everything and say, well, this is exclusionary politics, and they say we're going to implement the income transfer for the people. So I think there is no plan or details in what is being promised and discussed. I think it's just a pre-poll rhetoric as of such. But yes, I support the income transfer scheme overall, and I think we have actually laid down the foundation in the last 4 or 5 years. The PM Kisan is one, the implementation of Aadhaar is the other one, the greater use of technology is the another one. So I think we have to wait for more detailed plans to actually emerge to discuss what will happen now.
Okay, so minimum income guarantee schemes or income schemes, Mr. Bhattacharya, here to stay, should they be a part and parcel of our lives in the days and years to come?
You know, my point is that an income support scheme is best effective when it comes along with some basic access to a social infrastructure, in which I will include health, education, and water, and now I will include even environment, and economic infrastructure, which is road, housing, health, and hygiene. Now, if you do not provide that, as my colleague here said, that you are not really empowering and creating capacity in the people to elevate themselves to the next level of livelihood. So what you are doing by a simple dole is saying that, listen, here is your money, do whatever you want to do. Now, so therefore, income support scheme is fine, provided you have enough money to keep pumping in to these various key sectors by which the people who are going to be your targets actually continue to get those facilities. Now, in a situation where resources are finite and limited, what do? You do two things. One is either you pare down or phase out the existing schemes. Now, you talked about 91,000 crore of money being spent on education, 61,000 in health, another 3 lakh crore in various explicit subsidies. I'm not going into the implicit subsidies. So, can you really phase out those subsidies? Now, we had the PM Kisan Yojana, where 6,000 rupees per year. Now, there was a 70,000 crore of fertilizer subsidy, which is given in the name of farmers, but goes to the fertilizer companies. But the government has chosen not to touch even a portion of it. We had the subsidies in petrol and diesel for the last 10 years. It is only the last two governments, the UPA 2 and the Modi government, which has actually touched upon petrol and diesel and gradually phased out the subsidies in petrol and diesel. We still have subsidies in the cooking gas. So therefore, as a polity, my fear is that we are extremely reluctant to phase out something which we have given out. So if we have added something and we add something without phasing out something else, you will be adding to your fiscal burden. Now, that fiscal burden has another possible adverse implication, which is our taxation policy. Now, that to my mind is a real danger, because we have moved to a system wherein our taxation rates and the regime is becoming moderate. We are relying more on taxation base to be widened and tax compliance to be increased. Now, if you go into a situation to meet this additional requirement of income support scheme, my sense is that the government that comes, and if it has to implement this scheme, will naturally go in for the easy option of raising rates, because it cannot tolerate a fiscal deficit of 6% of GDP. So if you raise the income tax rates, your GST is already under pressure because of 28% rate. It has to come down further. Your income tax rates are already higher than what they ought to be. They need to be moderated, especially at that top end most probably, and the corporations are saying that. So if you are under pressure for moderating your tax rates, what you are actually seeing is the pressure on the government to raise tax rates, which will be actually taking the country to a reverse direction in my view. So I don't see that in the current situation, this kind of a scheme can work, provided we give ourselves a time of 5 years or 10 years and say after 5 years, we will provide these basic facilities to our citizens and then move into the income transfer support schemes. I think that then only we need to can probably make an indent. I am not in principle opposed to the idea of an income support scheme, but it has to come in addition to the basic facilities. The state cannot disclaim or cannot walk out of the responsibility of creating those basic facilities.
Right. So is it then a political gimmick at the end of the day? What is it really, Aarti Jairath?
Well, I think very clearly it is aimed at trying to attract votes. I think that past experience has shown, all political parties that, these sort of gimmicks, these SOPs that they announce before polls can work. And let's go back to that famous loan waiver of UPA in 2008. And, it did actually deliver for the Congress, because subsequently in 2009, the 3 states where the loan waivers were actually implemented in a fairly, substantial manner, that is UP, Andhra and Maharashtra, the Congress did phenomenally well. In fact, in UP, it showed a huge jump from 4 seats to 21 seats, So it did actually give them political benefits. Even in the recent state elections, we found when Rahul Gandhi announced the loan waiver scheme for Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, it paid the Congress political dividends, and they swept in Chhattisgarh, they won, and they managed to form governments in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. So there are political gains to be had from these kind of pre-poll announcements.
But at what cost is the question?
But that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing, because even today, now that they are in power in Madhya Pradesh and in Rajasthan, and they're getting down to this whole thing of actually waiving loans, I think they're finding it difficult, and that's why the whole process has really slowed down. And I don't think they've been, even in a place like Punjab, where the Congress has been in power since 2017, and again they had announced loan waivers before they came to power. I think they've only been able to implement waive loans of about up to 40% till now. So 60% of loans still haven't been waived. Yes, it does amount to a poll gimmick, but I mean, the Congress is not the only party. I think even what the government did at budget time, it should have been actually a vote on account, which is a conventional thing to do before an election, instead of which they presented what they called an interim budget, but it was almost a full-fledged budget in which they, made announcements. And we've seen regional parties before every assembly poll. They resort to things like, free gold, free pressure cookers, free laptops, free school bags, free cycles,
TVs.
Free TVs, all sorts of things. Now in Orissa, I believe the Congress has said free marriage kits for, for poor girls. So, I mean, it's sort of, it's getting really quite ridiculous really, from the sublime to the, most ridiculous. I remember a long time ago when I was younger and we used to cover polls, we always heard about, the distribution of liquor and money on poll eve. But it was all done clandestinely and hush-hush in the, sort of dead of the night. Now it's like open, openly. You're making promises openly and you're promising all kinds of goodies and freebies and so on. So, I mean, I really don't know where it will stop.
All right. One final reaction from you, Abhinav, before I wind up this segment, and then we can talk about, freebies and how they actually benefit the voter or not. I'm going to go back to a point that Mr. Bhattacharya was making about, the fisc really as far as schemes like this are concerned, and where is the money also really going to come from at the end of the day?
Well, on that point, I do agree with sir that we can't just implement it tomorrow. Let's say if Rahul Gandhi comes to power, he won't be able to do it, because we need a proper plan. It will take years to basically get us into a position where we can actually mobilize the resources and we can implement it. Of course, we will have to do away with some of the subsidies, which is another difficult task. So I agree with overall point you are saying, but I'm saying, well, this is basically
Congress has said that they will implement it only in the 3rd year. So they want to take 2 years of time too.
so the point is that, it's mainly a political question. Can you tax more? Can you tax the rich people more in this country? The middle class, I don't think they're going to tolerate it. We have just seen that government has to give them the tax concessions. And the other point is that, if it comes at the cost of withdrawal of the state, as he was talking about, then I think it will be a disaster. Because we have seen that what actually works in the poverty reduction is the public provision of social goods like health and education and so many other things. So I think what we should insist is that when the parties are announcing their plans or making poll promises, they should give a detailed plan as well as to what exactly they intend to do. Only then voters can make a proper and informed choice.
How they're going to execute what they're talking
it.
about. All right. On that note, we'll slip into a short break now. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching India Votes 2019 with me, Frank Pereira. Well, for the 2019 polls, some parties have released their manifestos. The NCP promises a complete loan waiver to all farmers, resuming talks with Pakistan, introducing tax reforms as well as incentives for educating girls, scrapping the Triple Talaq bill, increasing the minimum carpet area requirement for housing, and ensuring 33% reservation to women in Parliament. Another key focus area for the NCP is human resources development. To that end, it has promised to reinforce the Right to Education Act by increasing the age limit to 18 years. Currently, free and compulsory education of all children in the age group of 6 to 14 years is a fundamental right. Well, the DMK, on the other hand, has assured to provide honest governance and a secular administration. The party's manifesto for the Lok Sabha elections and by-elections to 18 assembly constituencies in the state deals with macro issues such as centre-state relations, a separate budget for agriculture, bringing education into the state list, abolition of NEET, a waiver of educational loans and return to the old pension scheme. Going back to its language policy that helped it capture power in the 1960s, the party also promises to urge the centre to declare Tamil as a co-official language in all the central government offices, institutions and nationalized commercial banks in the state. Well, the national eligibility cum entrance test that has been a source of anger and protests across Tamil Nadu found mention in the AIADMK's manifesto as well. The party has promised to urge Government of India to exempt students from the state from taking the NEET exam. It also wants education to be brought from the concurrent list to the state list and promises to urge the union government to provide free higher education to all children as a national policy. The party has also promised to ensure the monthly supply of Kaveri water as ordered by the Supreme Court and linking of the rivers Kaveri and Godavari and nationalization of all rivers. Going back to my panel now, Artijara, this is something that we've noticed as well. If you compare the manifestos of two political parties, they seem to be very similar. There's no real difference between one manifesto and the other. Why is that so?
Well, I think because the problems are so obvious, in terms of, poverty, in terms of, lack of educational infrastructure, in terms of lack of jobs. I think, the problems are so obvious and have been so obvious for a long, long time, for decades in fact, that ultimately at the end of the day, political parties have to promise the same thing. What is really missing in all the manifestos is a clear roadmap on how to implement all the things that they're promising. Very good idea that, you're going to give, free and compulsory education to all girl children up to the, class 12. But the point is what is your roadmap for implementation? Do you have enough schools? Do you have enough teachers? There's nothing like that is spelled out in any of these manifestos, which is why they all end up sounding the same. Because surely each party, depending on its, ideological bent, particularly, towards the economy, whether they're sort of on the right of the center or the left of the center, surely they would have different roadmaps to achieve these goals. But none of the political parties actually spell out their roadmaps in their election manifestos. And that's why they end up just sounding the same.
Right. So, Abhinav, when these last-minute promises are made in their manifestos, during campaigning, what kind of an impact do they have on the economy, really?
Well, I will say most of them have disastrous impact because you're basically promising anything to the public. And then you come to the power and you try to implement that. Like in the case of the loan waivers in the last Vidhan Sabha elections, when Punjab tried to implement that, now they're left with almost no money for the future capital expenditure. And in the long run, your economy can only grow when you create productive capacity. instead of just giving the loan waivers. But the point is that, as she was also pointing out, that there is no roadmap, there is no plan as to what they want to do and how they want to do. Take the example of the medical examinations, the NET examinations, which DMK is saying we're going to scrap it.
Even the AIADMK is saying the same thing.
Same thing. But you know, the problem is that they are doing so because they have not invested properly in their education system. So the students in the state are unable to compete at the all India level. I can say that because in the North Campus in the Delhi University, there are lots of students coming from the Tamil Nadu state board, and they really do struggle a lot because they haven't studied as much as their colleagues from the other boards have studied. So I think this is a populist move, and this basically take a long-term toll on the economy as well. You're not skilling your labor force, you're saying I'm going to make the exams easier. You are going to say we're not going to invest in the school system, we're going to say I'm going to implement right to education, which sounds very big, but right to education is also a disaster. We all know that. What you have done is basically you are imposing the Inspector Raj on the private schools, and many of the schools are shutting down. That's for fact. So instead of increasing the capacity, instead of increasing the schools, investing your money in the creation of the productive capacity, you are saying I'm going to give you exemption, I'm going to give you free scooters and frizz and whatnot, which does not create the long-term economic growth rate. And even if you want to implement the welfare schemes, you do have to make sure that the economy continues to grow, because only that can generate the income to implement these schemes like income support in the future.
Do these schemes, Mr. Bhattacharya, have any impact on the ground as such? I mean, you know, is the voter really swayed and moved by some of these schemes that are launched?
You know, I mean, the two the regional parties whose manifesto that you showed just now, I would imagine whatever promises they may have made will not have much of an impact. You know, in a sense that these are national elections. NCP is largely in Maharashtra, and DMK is in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting how the NCP can talk about, you know, we are going to restart India-Pak talks.
Yeah, so therefore I find that the regional party talking about issues that probably is beyond probably their remit, you know. So in a sense, it tells you a lot about India actually, and I will just make 2 points. One is that when a party like DMK talks about scrapping the requirement of Tamil Nadu boys and girls taking part in NEET, it actually tells you how the country's federal polity is under attack. Because what you are seeing is that here is a central government which tried to do something for the whole of India, not recognizing the state realities, and here is a state party which is saying I want to assert my independence in the field of education because this is my remit. So you know the lists of concurrent list and the state list and the central list, I see a conflict there. So, and similarly the NCP is talking about making the national the Right to Education Act making enforceable at a higher age limit. So it tells you about the challenges that the federal polity is actually facing in a larger frame of reference, really. So I think that's the. Otherwise, I find them, giving them, waivers. What kind of waiver DMK can give unless it aligns with a party that is, you don't expect DMK to form a party at the center, nor can you expect NCP to form a party. Then it will only come as an alliance partner, if at all it comes. Now the question is, why are they making promises of that nature which is beyond their remit? So that's something I find is little, it defies my understanding,
Yes, Abhinav, you want to add something?
Basically, these regional parties do not have skin in the game. So they know that they are not going to come to power at the center. So they will never have to redeem their promises. So they can promise anything. So what we have to take seriously is what the national parties are promising in the Lok Sabha election and what their major allies are promising, because that is going to impact the future policies of the country. Otherwise, regional parties can't promise anything.
Yes.
Actually, I have a slightly different view on this. I think, I mean, it is quite unusual, definitely, that regional parties are looking at macro policies, I mean, NCP talking about resuming Indo-Pak talks and so on. I think it's really a sign of the kind of interest that regional parties are now taking in national politics, yeah, and in national issues. because I think that, earlier they just stayed confined to their state, but now increasingly, because we've seen, coalition governments functioning in India since the 1990s, they have got increasingly more and more involved at the center. And that's why I think that they feel that they need to speak on national issues so that they can, show that they are ready to be part of a national government, that it's not just the remit of the national parties, but that even they as regional parties do have views on macro policy matters. So I think it's a very interesting change that is happening. And certainly, look, all these regional parties are going to be part of one coalition or the other. I mean, it's either the NDA or the UPA or whatever it's going to call itself. So, they will definitely, they will be sitting in on cabinet meetings. They will be part of discussions on macro policy issues. So, I mean, I think it's a great thing that they are talking about them in their election manifestos, and it's a sign of the maturing of our,
And they would like to assert their will at some point in time is what they could.
Absolutely. For instance, on foreign policy issues, particularly with relation to Bangladesh, I think West Bengal has very clear views on, what has to be done, on the sharing of the Teesta waters and so on. Now, you cannot have any agreement with Bangladesh without getting Bengal on board on this. So, immediately a regional party like the Trinamool Congress would have a very clear view on an issue which is otherwise a foreign policy matter.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I take that point that I think the regional parties, I think, do need to express their views on national issues, but to what extent it may make their stand clear, but to what extent it works in electoral terms, I don't know. So that's the point I was making. You know.
No, it
All
may
right.
or may not.
All right. Taking the discussion forward now, Abhinav, so do these freebies that are announced, at the nth hour really reach the intended beneficiaries?
Well, so far the experience has been pretty bad. So we know that India has been spending lots of money on providing subsidies and other welfare schemes, but they have not been reaching the people. But in the last couple of years, I will say in the last 5 years at least, there has been an improvement in the efficiency, and that has much to do with the adoption of the modern technology, like you have Aadhaar. See, Aadhaar is not just about your identification that you simply go and press your thumb and you get something. It's a platform, and on the Aadhaar platform you can build many other different kinds of schemes, and you can custom design them. So what we are seeing here is that we are moving towards a situation where these schemes are going to be more and more efficient. So the DBT transfer has been a great success. So I know when I was in the college and how difficult it was to claim the scholarship from the center, but now for the younger generation it's very easy. So they get every month, which is very punctual scholarship they are getting. And also because in the last 5 years we have transferred, or let's say per year we have been transferring 5.6 lakh DBT. As the Arun Jaitley recently told us that India, the government is already giving 5.6 lakh income transfer to the people in the form of various DBTs. Now these DBTs are actually reaching the people. So I think in that sense there is an improvement, but there are lots of leakages still, and there's lots of exclusion, what you say. There are lots of people who are eligible for getting the support, but are not getting it. So I think we have to do work on those areas as well. But so far the experience before that has not been good.
Right. Atijarat, lofty promises are made, the voter is promised practically everything. And at the end of the day, we see that, many of these promises are not kept. The political parties don't deliver on many of these promises. Can these parties be, legally forced to do something about it? How legally enforceable are some of these promises?
Well, I think this debate has been, sort of come up before. And I think it was debated with the Election Commission. I think there was even some kind of a court hearing because somebody went to court on it, Supreme Court if I'm not mistaken. And the Supreme Court said that, look, we don't want to enter into this discussion because, it's very difficult to hold a party legally accountable, for a promise that, or an unfulfilled promise that they made at election time. But I do think that there is something called the court of the people. And I think it's for people to hold political parties accountable. Now, the unfortunate thing is that, manifestos have become just pieces of paper. Nobody really reads them. I mean, we've had some ridiculous situations where, like before the Gujarat polls, the state assembly polls, the manifesto was released just 24 hours before, polling began. So, it just shows the kind of importance that, political parties pay to manifestos. And I don't think people really read them very closely. People hear what is said at rallies, what is said on television, and those are the kind of promises that stick in their minds. For instance, this whole thing of 15 lakhs that was supposed to be delivered in, everybody's account when black money was finally brought back from abroad. Now, that promise actually was never made. It's not there in the BJP's manifesto, and even, Narendra Modi didn't make it in such clear terms. He said that if black money comes back to India, it would amount to 15 lakhs per person. That's what he had said. But somehow, the people heard it from a dais, and somehow it got stuck in their minds as, we'll all get 15 lakhs in our bank accounts. So that sticks in the head as a poor promise. Now, how do you hold anybody accountable for something which is a misinterpretation? So that's the point, that, I think people need to get more serious about promises that political parties make. And for that, manifestos should actually be put out much earlier than they are released, and they should be circulated, and there should be an attempt by, I don't know, maybe civil rights groups or, election commission or, election watchdogs and so on, to circulate them, to explain to the people, so that people can then,
make an informed choice.
Yeah, make an informed choice, or then at least, match what they have received in 5 years compare it to the promises that were made when elections were held 5 years ago. And then they can make an informed choice, and they can hold a party accountable for, a promise that wasn't delivered. The other problem with these promises is one very, amusing thing. For instance, the Samajwadi Party in 2012 had promised free laptops to all, I think class 11 and 12 students or whatever, young people. And I think a lot of laptops were handed out. Subsequently, I'm told that these laptops were sold by the people who got them because, there's so little electricity, most people didn't have connection to, internet and so on. So the laptops actually proved quite useless to them. So yes, they made some money off it because they sold the laptops, but it didn't turn out to, serve the purpose that it was supposed to, which is to help people study or, be more informed or, be more aware of what's going on.
Yeah,
so this is the problem, that you make a promise, but you don't have the infrastructure to really, make that promise effective or work properly.
Absolutely. I mean, couple of things, Mr. Bhattacharya. One, of course, the manifestos being released at the nth moment. I mean, why do you even release the manifesto then? Don't have a manifesto, because you're campaigning, you're doing everything else before that. So just don't have a manifesto. And the other thing, of course, are these, freebies, these doles reaching the right people? And even if they do reach the right people, they don't stay with them.
That's right. I think I have a slightly different view. I agree with you that they are not legally enforceable, but I think there is something missing in our system which probably with further debate and discussion we should try to fix, which is that if an election manifesto is released by a political party, and if it is a document that the party swears by, then I think there is something that the Election Commission is not doing all right. If it is an election promise to the people for a recognized political party before it wants to renew the mandate or get the mandate, then I think that the manifesto should be the kind of a Bible to which the party should be held accountable. Now, why is it not that 5 years later, after a general election commission, it's like a budget, a budget is presented every year, and at the end of the year, when the finance minister rises and he presents a report called Action Taken Report, in which you actually see that what the finance minister has achieved and not achieved, and what is the state of that proposal. Now, why is it that Election Commission, since it is a regulator, it is an electoral regulator after all, why is it that the Election Commission is not taking upon itself the responsibility of, if you are a national party, this was your election manifesto, 5 years later, you're going back to the people to seek their mandate. Now, here was your manifesto in such and such year, and 5 years later, this is your action taken report. Now, in my view, a time has come where we must debate and discuss that why the Election Commission as the electoral regulator cannot enforce it, and every political party which comes and issues a manifesto should also be made to come after when they want to renew their mandate, come with an action taken report on their manifesto. So it's fairly simple. Why should it be left to a newspaper or an NGO or some watch body, the think tank? I think it is actually a very important document. It should not be allowed to be released 24 hours before the election. Similarly, an action taken report is perfectly valid expectation from a very vibrant democracy like ours. And as far as the loopholes in the system of how a scheme that is being announced, I think it is a part of the governance issue there. I mean, after all, when a government is in place, as this particular instance of UP was cited, I think that there was a government in place, and the government was using the people's money, taxpayers' money, to finance those purchase of those laptops. And how was it used, and how it was misused, and all that? It is a governance failure. It is not really a problem of the political party. Then it becomes a deeper problem of the government in place. So there are two problems. At one level, I see the manifestos should become an accountable document, a document on which the Election Commission should hold the political parties accountable. And second, if those promises are going to be implemented by a government, it comes in a different domain then. The government should be held accountable. How is that money being used? So I think there are two issues which I think will address both the questions that you raised.
Absolutely. Okay. Time now to get closing comments from all my guests with, the best way forward. Abhinav, starting with you.
Well, we have to really start delinking the issues, right? So, income transfer, as we were discussing, cannot be linked to only poverty reduction. We have to look at the poverty reduction separately, income transfer scheme separately, and different issues separately. I don't agree to that point that we can try to hold the political parties accountable for their manifestos, and Election Commission should definitely not do it. Why do you want to them to actually take some action to implement a disastrous manifesto? I think that's okay. They can promise, let the people decide. Let's not ask for the action taken report, because I don't want NCP to say what they did to restart the Indo-Pak dialogue. The point is that we really need to change the discourse of the politics, right? So the democratic politics delivers on the basis of what people are discussing, what they are talking about, and on the issues they are voting on. It's a harsh fact that in India, no one votes on the issue of provision of health and education. If you don't vote on that issue, you don't get those services. If you're voting for loan waiver, you will get loan waivers.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid point. I mean, you look at the environment, no one seems to be talking about the environment, but some of the most polluted cities in the world are in India. Aarti?
No, absolutely. And I think, this is a failure, of all of us as people, that our elections are not thinking elections. We tend to vote on emotions. And if you just go back into the history of elections, most elections have been fought and won on emotive issues, whether it's been democracy or corruption or whatever. Even when corruption is an issue, you vote, making corruption the issue. But then when, a government comes into place, very few steps are really taken to, to actually fight corruption, which is why today India is considered one of the most corrupt countries in Asia. I think somebody's done a study recently and released the findings. So this is a problem. And, how do we get about doing this? And I can only say that the only way of doing it is voter education. And, I also feel that I don't think the Election Commission can be made to hold political parties accountable for unimplemented manifestos. But I do think what Election Commission can do is they've already got a program for voter education. I think they need to enlarge the scope of that program so that voters are made aware of issues. So that right now the program is basically to educate people how to go out and vote, how to handle the machine, how to handle the voter slips, where the booths are, and so on. But I think that this should be broadened to include things like issues, to include things like manifestos, to include, so that people understand that voting comes once in 5 years, but it is really an important tool in the hands of a person to hold the government accountable
Right.
to the promises that they made.
Right. Mr. Bhattacharya, close the show for us with your concluding
Well,
remarks.
my sense is that, if you want to have more, lively discussions, lively debate in election, on election eve, I think one thing which is missing, that we don't have national TV debates in this country. Why is it that our national leaders are not asked or allowed to have debates with opposing leaders on national television? Why is it that the leaders are not brought in and face to face? Now, this is one of the most exciting spectacle of the US elections is that. Now, we are not a presidential form of democracy. We are a parliamentary democracy, but yet we are fighting elections almost on a presidential form, where you have a prime minister candidate already there. Now, why is it that we are moving away from that? I think a time has come where people of this country would like to have a nationally televised debate among leaders. And that will probably help in, understanding and disseminating issues. One final point, I know my other colleagues have disagreed with me on the election commission thing. My broad thesis is that political parties in this country are not accountable. They are not an NGO, therefore they don't cover under the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, but they also don't come under the RTI Act. Now, my question is that time has come that the political parties, they make promises, but they cannot be held accountable. Now, this is probably taking it in our democracy and elections too far, where the political parties will make some statements, but they will not be held accountable by anybody, except in the court of the people, by the people. But I think a time has come, but if they make a written document out, there should be some way of holding them to account.
All right.
I
Very
think
quickly,
we should simply ask the political parties to come up with a detailed plan whenever they're making a promise. So if they're making a promise of this income support scheme, ask them to present a plan right now. I think that's a better way of doing it.
No, and also, whatever they announce, they should be announced several weeks before the elections. I mean, even this scheme that has been announced by the Congress, the first phase of polling begins on the 11th of April.
That's right.
So what? We're just 15 days before the poll, and suddenly this thing has been
And you
sprung,
still haven't seen the fine
minute
details of the scheme.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is no way of announcing the scheme.
All right.
There should be some kind of a time frame, and that the Election Commission can very easily do.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India Votes 2019. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.